All right, we are good. So yeah, welcome back. I've still got the Jays up there. They are still winning, so it will stay there. There is a game tonight. Hopefully you all be home before it starts. You can watch it. I want to watch it too. I'm not going to lie. If this goes past 8, I will be sitting here with the game up while I'm helping you. But this week, we're talking about modularity. So I'm going to do about an hour or so of lecturing, and then we'll jump into actually building out our weekly activity. And by the end of the day today, all of you should have a solid little set of modular pieces that you can use in a game engine and will use in a game engine for the weekly activity. I've actually not opened the weekly activity this week until I think it opens at 6:30 p.m. to kind of force you to sit here and actually learn what you need to do before we jump into the submissions and everything. So this week is all about modularity. We're thinking about different ways that we can break up these large assets, these large environments, into smaller little chunks and pieces. Up until now, everything that you've made has been pretty simple and pretty one-to-one. So you make a model of some kind, you give it some kind of textures, and that is it, right? One model, one texture set, one material. Super simple. We learned all about that last week. One model, one material, one everything. But I lied to you. That's not the only way props are made. We don't always want to have one model, one material, and one texture set. We can actually start mixing and mashing a bunch of different things together to build up larger spaces. Yeah. So your simple models look something like this. You're all quite familiar with it by now. We've got one set of textures to put our model in game. But before we get into actually talking about kit bashing or modularity, there is one more concept I need you to understand. Okay. So this is the concept of modularity. It is essentially trying to build up, I've said it like 3 times now, but building up these larger spaces with a few number of parts. That is a concept that has no set and defined rules. So this is a bit of something you have to kind of explore with. Now, we can take a tiny little itty bitty part and build up one larger part, and then use a bunch of these larger parts to build up an even larger scene. Or we can make a bunch of big parts and then put those big parts together. So there are levels to this that we can kind of work our way through, and we will, right? But the goal here is to do as little work as possible while making as much stuff as possible. You guys are working in small teams. As far as I'm aware, there are no teams of like 14 people. I've had one of those. It was interesting. It can be hard to manage. You guys, 6 people, not a lot to manage, but you just don't have the manpower to put together these insanely complex and massive places. This is way more noticeable in environments than anything else because we have so much to do. I'm using this example here as a Lego set. To try and get you to understand this concept of modularity a little bit more, I want to think about the Lego instructions. Have any of you actually built Lego? I'm going to just assume all of you, at some point in your life, have probably built with Lego. Okay, well, there are a few things that we can relate to here. One is, you might not know this, but Lego very, very, very infrequently makes new pieces. They have to go through this entire process and submit these crazy long documents anytime they want Lego to introduce a new piece, right? So if somebody's making a new kit, they really have to justify those new pieces. Every other set you see is going to be built up of existing pieces. And the way that they work at Lego, what they do is they have these people that create these sets out of the existing pieces, right? So we have 2 groups of people working here. We've got the kit people, the people who understand what parts should be built, build them, and then we have the, I don't remember what they call them exactly, like the Lego Master. Is that what it is? The Lego Master?
Master Builders.
Master Builders, that's what it is. The other group is these Master Builders who are going to take the pieces that the kit team is providing them and build all of these incredibly intricate builds. Okay? We're going to operate in a few similar different ways when we're talking about building up these modular pieces. We want to use the least number of pieces possible, especially the least number of new pieces. So we'll have a team working on kit pieces, and we'll have another team working on actually using these kit pieces to build these things up. If you're more of a technical person, you're probably going to lean more towards that kit building side, thinking about all the different elements that go into modeling and texturing and creating these kits, making them interlock in ways that make sense, right? And if you're more of a creative person, then you're probably going to lean more towards the actual world building side, where you start putting these kit pieces together. In industry, you have what's called the object bank team. That does all the modeling and everything like that. And then you have what's called the level art team. And they're the ones who actually take these models and smash them all together and make these cool things. So it does extend to what we're doing here as well. Okay. What I want to kind of do is jump in and take a quick look at this example from Skyward Sword. It's a little bit of a case study, but I'm just going to show you the general core principle behind some of this modular stuff, and then we'll explore kind of how it all gets used and the concepts at play here. So if you've never been to this website called NoClip, I would highly recommend it. If I just pop it in here. It's essentially just a digital collection and recreation of the engine and stuff for old, mostly Nintendo products. It might be all Nintendo games.
No, there's some Xbox games on there you can see.
Is there Nintendo place? There you go. So what's great about these resources is we can actually hop into different level maps and different pieces of art that were made for games and examine them basically one-to-one with how they were in the engine. So we can learn a ton from doing this. I would recommend checking out NoClip. I'm going to use it again next week when we talk about the other side of modularity, which is going to be grids and tile sets. But this week we're just talking about kit bashing. So let's look at a few things. I've got to jump into layer 1 so I can pull up the goddess temple. And we'll kind of break down a little bit how they built all of this stuff. So as you can see, this is an incredibly detailed environment, all in all. There is so much going on here. But the team that made this environment, as long as with all the other environments in Skyward Sword, is honestly not too much bigger than each of your GDW teams, which is a crazy thing. But I'm pretty sure the art teams for Skyward Sword was probably somewhere between 20-something people, plus outsourcing, of course. So you can make do with a lot as long as you know how to kind of reuse assets. The most bare bones way I can show you is to look at an example like these walls. Okay? We've got very obviously repeating detail all throughout our scene. We don't want to just model that in Blender, call it a day, and export it as one large chunk though, because we can import it in here as a bunch of individual pieces that all share the same properties, model, textures, and everything else. Beyond that, we can take it a step further. Not only our models can be modular, but our textures as well. We can share textures between different assets in a way that lets us build up larger and larger pieces. A big example of this is going to be this piece here, which is the giant goddess statue. If I pull up the textures, it might take me a second to actually find them because they are named kind of crazy, and I didn't work on this game, believe it or not, so I don't know where they all are. But you can see here, if you go through, we can look at all the different textures. I'll see if I can find some of them that are relevant and find a relative points in the map. Let's take a look at these ones, for example. So these textures are walls of buildings. They have a whole bunch of different variations, and that allows them to have a bunch of variation when it comes to the walls and the buildings that are here. We can even reuse the same kind of models and things for the houses, but just change the textures and little extra flair elements to add some variety. So that's another area where modularity is going to come in here. You can see these houses, they've got the same texture more or less, just with a changed color. So they've made a color swap, changed it, everything else is more or less the same. We can also instance these decorative models a bunch of different times. So this window, right, is used here for this particular house. And in the back we have these other shaped windows just to break it up. But all in all, it's still using more or less the same assets. And I'm sure if I flew around this scene long enough, I would find other places that they're using all of these different elements as well. So these windows are probably being used somewhere else in the scene if I could find it. I can't promise you that. Okay, there you go, right here, right? So that window is being used all over the place, right? Here we have a different variation of that window, but again, it's going to be reused in a bunch of different places. So this is how we're able to build up these giant environments. It's all about reusing everything we possibly can. Now, there are some things that can't be reused. One major example, the entire island, right? The shape of the island is very specific to this map, it can't be reused for anything else, so there isn't really a massive reason to make it reusable. So you can see they've actually made the entire island just one mesh within their mesh editing software. More than likely what actually happened is at export, when the game was ready to launch, they combined it all into one. And then you can see all the trims and fun little details are added on top afterwards. We'll look into this exact map a little bit more when we talk about environment art and that kind of thing in the next 2 weeks. But now we're still just looking at all the modularity, right? Look at this texture. It's actually just the same texture as down here. Apply it up here. You can tell it's stretched out a little bit, right? We've got these blocks squished, so we have these small details. But that same detail is here, right? And it's going to continue to tile upwards. Okay, we learned about how the UVs extend beyond the space and tile, right? So all of these textures are very flexible and reusable all throughout the scene, anywhere basically where we can tile things. For these bridges, one last example, we can see that these pieces are built up of a bunch of individual planks and different things like that. So we've got maybe 1 or 2 different plank objects that the artists at Nintendo have just kind of mashed together a bunch of times to create these bridges. They can take those exact same planks and smash them together over here to make a different type of bridge. Over here, the same thing. So by making just a few planks of wood, they've actually created an entire series, an array of bridges, gates, doors, and other props throughout the scene. So this is the core fundamental principle behind modularity. Like I said, you can find it in anything as small as a bridge or as anything as big as something like the goddess statue and the walls all around it, right? There are levels to this. You'll have to kind of get used to feeling out what can I make modular and what can I not make modular. If it's something that's going to be a big, unique set piece of your scene that isn't going to be changed much and is pretty much only used for one thing, take the town hall here for example, right? This piece is very central to this scene. It's not going anywhere else. We're not reusing it. We don't need to. We're still making it efficient by using the same modular pieces we had. You've got all of these being reused. We've got a bunch of modular pieces up in here. And we've got that same tiling modular wall texture for the buildings that we had earlier. But it as a whole is just one model. It's not going to be reused in a larger kit. It is the kit. It is the result of the kit. Okay? I would highly recommend you go check this out on your own, in your own time as well. Just hop onto NoClip. You can kind of pop through and just find all these little things that they've got in the scene. You can check different games. This one's maybe not a great example for looking at objects, since for the most part, the only objects that are not part of the base island mesh are those that need physics, like the flags. If you look at other games, though, like Mario Galaxy, you can find probably other examples of models being placed together as opposed to all being exported at once. So there you go, right? You can get an idea of how they model their things. Which pieces are separate here? Is this one piece? How are we tying it all together, etc.? Where are we seeing the reuse of our objects, right? Here we have more reuse going on. This tiling texture is just going across these logs, and then these ones are just the same thing, but the log is just extremely stretched out. You can even see it in the texture, right? This looks proper, and this looks extremely stretched out. But you never notice that playing. We can get away with a little bit of messing up our textile density and a little bit of stretching our textures as long as we know when and where we're doing it. The players most of the time aren't going to notice. This makes kit bashing really, really, really powerful. That it is. So is Skyward Sword. So this is the little example I've got. Basically just putting together a quick bridge. I've got just 3 pieces of wood. Any of you, any single one of you, can make 3 pieces of wood in under 10 minutes. I'm willing to bet. Unity is downloading, don't mind that. Right, I think any of you could make, this is like the worst time I could have done this. Any of you can make 3 pieces just like this. They're just 3 rectangles, right? Nothing crazy at all. But with them, right, you can build up a bunch of these individual pieces. So this is what I'm talking about again with that whole kit scenario. One of your teammates might be more inclined to building this kind of stuff, right? Really good at making individual assets, is the best at making just single pieces of wood. But someone else in your team might be more creative, might be able to reuse those pieces a little bit better and create actual full props out of them. It might also be the same person, totally possible. But if you lean one way or the other, feel free to let your other teammates know. I think it would be more beneficial. Jason.
Would you use it for a situation like this, like a single or is that like
Again, it's going to be like situation depending, but let's say I wanted this to be a series of bridges all connected. Maybe there's a bridge here, and then I've got that central piece, and then branching bridges outwards, right? So I might need a bunch of different lengths of bridges, a bunch of different, sizes of bridge, ones that go up, ones that go down. Then yes, I would say it's probably worthwhile to do this kind of thing. If I'm just literally making this one bridge and I'm using it once in my world and it only ever needs to be that size, well, then I'm probably just going to model it like this from the get-go and call it a day. All right, so it's hard to quantify exactly when this will save you time, but mostly just think about how flexible do I need the prop to be.
Don't you end up with like a ton of different objects in your scene?
Yes, which isn't always necessarily a bad thing. It kind of depends on. We're going to look at what's called instancing in a second and how that kind of works on the game engine side of things, and that might help clear up why it's actually faster to render like this than it is the other way. Yep.
Would you do it like make each individual object? Would you like put those into the game engine and build it there, or just put it into another Blender project, build it there, and then later?
That is a really good question, and again, there's no right answer. If it's something that's static like this bridge, I would probably do it in Blender. Reason being, as Jason kind of just mentioned, if you do it as these are all separate objects and you export these into your game engine and build them like this in the game engine, the render times are going to be a lot heavier because you've just got so many of these things instanced everywhere, right? And then instead of rendering this whole bridge in one pass, you'll have to do one pass for these pillars, one pass for these, one pass for these under rails. So if it's something static, I would recommend building it in Blender first. If it's something that needs to be a little bit more dynamic, maybe you need doors to open up or anything like that, I could say build it in engine. Lucas?
So I have a question because I have seen some videos or at least some people making like modular like codes, like a code that can create modular pieces. So that's how you do it, or is how this is a bit out of scope.
Yeah, you're probably thinking of like either geometry nodes or Houdini or just any kind of procedural model creation where you could, let's say, model one long box and it will automatically generate the bridge. Yeah, that's not something we're going to cover today. That is something you can do with either geometry nodes or just code for procedural meshes. There's a tool called Houdini that's the industry standard that we use for all that stuff. I won't be covering Houdini. We don't actually cover Houdini at all, modeling 1 or 2. It's a very expensive, very robust program that can be pretty hard to learn. So it's not something that we do, but it is pretty core to tech art, yeah. This is still the fundamental of that stuff, because in order to make those procedural meshes, you need these base pieces first. It doesn't quite just make it out of thin air. You would have to kind of tell it, hey, these are my wood planks, and this is where they should go as you go through it. Okay. So this is just, we went through the live example, kind of looking at all different places, but this is the general idea, right? I've just made like 4 planks of wood, and then the Skyward Sword people made like 4 planks of wood, and then those 4 planks of wood make up that much of the map, which is great. That's efficient. It's quick. The artist probably spent literally less than 1 day building all of these bridges and plopping them in the scene and texturing them, right? Super great, super efficient. It's how you can build a level like this with only like 4 or 5 people. There's one more concept that you need to understand though before we jump into building modular assets, and that's going to be instancing. So up until now, we've been doing what's called duplicating. You hit Shift-D and you create a duplicate of your object. If I just hit Shift-D 3 times and drag them around, I've got 3 different objects. But when we actually look and start to edit these objects, you'll see they all act as individual creations. They're all individual instances. You can confirm this even further by going to the Properties tab, finding the Vertex or Mesh Information panel, and up at the top there's a slot for mesh data. So that is actually what's determining the mesh shape of your object. It has nothing to do with the object itself. It's literally just that. If you change that to something else, your mesh will change. It will keep its point of origin. It will keep its applied scale, rotation, and everything else. but your mesh itself, the geometry, will change. On the contrary, what I'm going to introduce is Alt-D. So I think I've talked about it a little bit before, but basically what Alt-D means is we're going to create an instance of that object. So we're not creating a new object, we're creating a, let's say, empty object that references the existing one. Basically how object-oriented programming works. So here we have 3 cubes, and when I move one of the vertices on the cube, it's actually going to affect all 3 of the cubes. And up here, where before we had cube.001 and 2 and 3 and 4, now we've just got cube and a little button to the side that has the number 4 in it. So that little button means that there are 4 objects currently referencing this same mesh, and all of them will be adjusted when you edit said mesh. So if I hop into Blender and turn on my screencast, if I just add a cube, we can see it's cube 004 here. If I shift D, right, duplicate, it's now cube 005 for my mesh data. If I change this to something else, you can see it is actually going to change the mesh. If I change it to the Unreal Mannequin, I've changed the mesh. The object is still my cube, but the mesh data is different. If I Alt-D, now I've got this little 2 popped up, and anything I do to this object is going to happen to both. They're both using cube.004 as their mesh reference. You can imagine, just from the bridge example, why that would be so useful. So let's look at this. Instance materials by default share these properties. So if you're ever confused and you're instancing and you're wondering why some things aren't being carried over, it doesn't copy everything. It just copies most things. It's going to copy your geometry. So we just showed the little mesh panel there. It's going to copy your materials. It's going to copy your UVs, vertex groups, vertex colors that you learned in the lab with Josiah, shape keys, and more. So there is more than that, but those are the core things that you would actually worry about. The other big things that they don't share is modifiers and constraints. This can be pretty important if you're ever considering working with modifiers. Let's say I add a plane here, and I Alt-D it to build up some prop. Now I've decided that this plane needs to be thicker. And I want to go about that by using a solidify modifier. So let me add a solidify here. Even though I've used Alt-D, my other object is not changing. If I change the mesh will still change, but it will not copy the modifier. Other things that it won't copy is object-based scaling and rotation. So I can still rotate this around in object mode, same with scale, and it won't affect the other mesh, right? Because I'm editing in object mode, not edit mode for the mesh itself. So we can build different pieces with our Legos here. Yep.
So if you apply the modifier or the rotation and scale, would that also affect the other one?
Exactly. So if I was to rotate this and then hit apply, it will actually yell at me. Because it knows that you probably don't mean to mess up all of the other things instancing this model. If, let's say by accident, you've scaled something ahead of time, and you want all of them to be applied scale, right? Because you need to have them at a scale of 111 to properly UV and everything else. You just have to select all of the objects that are instanced, and if you hit Control A and apply, it will let you apply, as long as they are all the same. As for the modifiers, the same thing. Once I apply this, I'll have to remove that link between the two. So let's do that. I'm going to apply. I've removed the link between the two, right? This is now plane.002 instead of plane.001. But I actually have geometry to work with. There's a new hotkey. If I click any object and then the object I want to link, I can hit Control L, and I can actually link or transfer any of this data. So I could have just transferred the modifiers over, but in this case, I'm going to link object data, and that will once again tell Blender, hey, this object should be an instance of this one. So even if you shift D'd it at first, you can remedy that by just linking it afterwards. So now once again, these objects are tied together. So if you do have that issue, let's say where one of these is scaled and you want to apply it or whatever, you can always fix it afterwards by going, hey, okay, let's relink our data. Control L. That's going to be very, very useful. I should have included it in the slides, but I figured it would get across enough in the examples as we go through it.
What's Control L, sorry?
Control L is to link. So you click an object you want to link to the object it's being linked to, and then hit Control L. And it will link that object data back up. So this property sharing thing going on with these instances works forever. It's not just one. I could instance something 1,000,000 times, 100,000,000 times, and every single one would be affected. As you can see, I just used a particle thing to drop all these on here. If I select these front faces, I'm selecting the front faces on every single instance in that particle emitter. This is great because it's very, very efficient. Let's take a look at how this instancing stuff actually works in Engine. So it works not just in Blender, but in Engine as well. Normally when we're drawing something to the screen, we're going to go through this little process. This is very abridged, by the way. Don't tell Alvaro about this. But you take your object as data. It needs to move into the memory so that your computer can access it real quick, and that takes a second. And then it gets drawn and rendered, and everything else happens, right? And then for our next mesh, we're going to go back, grab that mesh, load it up into memory again. So we're now using more memory, and it's taking longer, and we're drawing that object too. So if I have two that are the exact same mesh, there's absolutely no reason to export it twice like this. When we're instancing, we can skip that loading into memory again. We load into memory once. We take our mesh, we load it into memory, and then instead of going back to load into memory for the next object, we just go, hey, that's the same one. Draw that one too. While you're at it, draw all of them. For every separate object, you get one render pass for geometry, so it will just happen all at once. It's way faster, right? Which means it's way less computationally heavy. So to your question earlier, Jason, about them all being separate objects, it can actually be better rendering-wise, especially if you have a lot of them. Obviously, the more of these you have in your scene, the greater the benefit you get from instancing. Okay? So those are all the core principles we kind of need to understand before we get into what is kit bashing and putting these things together. Any questions about that kind of stuff? Pretty cut and dry. It's nothing too crazy, and it builds off of everything you got so far, but if you do have questions later, feel free to let me know. Now we get into the fun stuff. We're actually going to start mashing things together. So what is kit bashing as a concept? As a concept, kit bashing is about three things, more or less. Three things you should all love. I love them too. Saving time, doing less work, and making things more efficient as far as computationally goes. Models. So all great things, benefits galore. What are the downsides? None. So you should be using it. Absolutely. Every single one of your games will use it in some capacity, right? So kit bashing, what it actually roots from is not 3D modeling at all, as I learned out actually like 2 days ago. But it doesn't actually root in 3D modeling at all. Kit bashing is a term that actually comes from building physical models, more or less, so building things like Warhammer figures or things like that. Generally, you're taking a bunch of different parts from different kits to build up cooler and unique ideas. In this case, I found this course on ArtStation if you want to learn more about it, but it's from John Mahoney's kit bashing course on ArtStation, where he takes a children's toy and a bunch of these kit bashed plastic pieces and meshes them all together to create what you saw there, that really cool rusted old dumper truck thing, right? We're kind of doing this exact same thing, but in 3D. Now, this quick example is obviously much less detailed, but it kind of gets the same elements across. In this scene, I've got just a few things built up. Very small, very quick. This is actually what we're going to be building later. We're going to make a set of construction / traffic related items and kind of mash them all together. But you can see we have some reuse. So these are my quote unquote unique pieces. I've got one steel girder, I've got this blue piece to represent some T-bar, some iron T-bar, some pink piece to represent some flat iron bar, and then a pylon and another pylon, basically. So anywhere you see the same color, it's actually reusing the same model. So in this case, right, I've got these bits used for both of those, and we can expand on this a lot further. So I've built this kit, and now I want to expand on it and build more with it. We can take it to any kind of extreme we want. I could build one of those big, like, billboard looking things with these exact same pieces. So to cover the fronts and the tops, I'm using that steel bar girder thing, right? To build up the actual structure and support stands, I'm just reusing those T-bars. I probably should have thickened them. This thing would probably come right out of the ground if you actually put it in. And then those little pink things, right? They're scaled up a little bit, but nobody would really notice because they're not scaled up that much. Those are just what's made of these little pieces that sit down here. So I'm pretty sure I made all of this in like literally 15 minutes, right? So you can imagine how much more you can build up your environments if you use these principles. Things like the traffic cone are obviously going to be more unique, but they're not going to have their own material or their own textures. They're all going to be built into the same thing. When we think about these traffic cones, we're going to have these traffic cones with these white and orange sort of patterns throughout. Well, those white and orange patterns we can reuse all over our barricades, right? We might have a few variations of barricades, but they're all going to use that same white and orange pattern. So we don't need to create unique UVs for those. We don't need to create unique materials for those. We're going to share that between the assets. So the goal is when we build this, we're going to put everything we can on one material, and that'll be our traffic kit material. We can have tileable textures for these iron bits and things like that that will go across even longer pieces of the same thing. It'll be a lot easier to understand once we actually start doing it, but that'll be a little bit later, right? You'll notice the one thing that's not using that black material is that big sign, okay? It is okay for things to not be using entirely the same material. I don't need every single part of your kit to use the same material. Unique detail needs unique detail, right? So just like that thing I was talking about earlier with the Skyward Sword Town Hall kind of thing, surely some of those textures were unique to just the Town Hall. That is fine. Right? We're trying to optimize as much as we can, but we're not optimizing to the point where it's impeding our ability to make cool stuff. So with that said, right, the more complex your target is, the more time you will save and the cooler stuff you will be able to make by making use of kit bashing. So in this case, this object is obviously extremely complex, which means when we're building up our kit, we are going to have a pretty high overhead right at the beginning. It will take a while to build up those pieces, but the result is these pieces that would normally take days, weeks, months to build normally, we just mash a bunch of pre-made pieces together and it's there. And if we want a second one, it will take no time at all, right? So this strategy is good for big upfront cost and time, and then very little time down the road to do more, right? And they can be used at any size. So I kind of mentioned this earlier, but we can start with something small and just build up props like we are with this construction set. We can build up big. We can make whole walls, windows, furnaces, entire buildings, and build up from big to small, all using modular pieces. So any stage of your game, any part, try to think about where I can use modular pieces to make this faster or to make it more flexible, right? If you go work in AAA, you will use this every day. This is like it. If you're a junior, you'll be making rocks, probably, or something like that, or walls, right? That's how you get started. It's all about kit bashing. This is a great skill to have, and it's great to put on your resume. So what do we actually need when we're building these kits? What are we looking to make? Well, we need a few things. There's a few goals we want to have in mind. Otherwise, we won't know what to build. Ideally, our kits are going to have pieces of all different sizes. Now, I did talk about how, it's okay if our kits, like, we can stretch and size them a little bit differently and it'll not affect things too much. But you don't want to go totally overboard with this. If I need a steel girder the size of, like, a helicopter, I can't take that little pink piece and blow that up to the size of a girder. It will look terrible. It will be incredibly obvious. It's just really scaled up, right? So we want to have a variety of sizes. We want to have a variety of pieces of varying detail and complexity. So some pieces should be incredibly detailed. We can maintain the same shape language throughout, absolutely. All of these pieces do an incredible job of maintaining the same shape, language, and detail, right? So a lot of circular elements mixed with hatched rectangular elements through them, keeps them all tied together. But you can see there are also a lot of pieces that are very simple, plain and flat, and a lot of room for the eye to breathe. If you make all your pieces, let's say, too detailed or too simple, it's going to be harder for the person that's putting them together to actually make good, appealing looking shapes and contrast with them. So we want various detail and complexity. We also want varying silhouettes. So we want these pieces to be able to be put together in a bunch of different ways. Now, if this is more for these more complex kits. For something like our construction kit we're going to make in a bit, doesn't really matter as much because it's like a bunch of rectangles more or less. But for something that's more complex, because again, you can do this for anything, whether it be buildings, mechs, etc. You want a bunch of different shapes and silhouettes. If I have something in my mind, let's say like a race car, if your kit doesn't have any pieces that are kind of straight, then I won't be able to get those curves and edges that I need when I'm building my race car, and then I'm just going to be disappointed in your kit, right? So you aren't going to know what the artists are going to use or make with these kits, so try and give them as much flexibility as possible to create any kind of silhouette or shape that they want to make. The last piece, yep.
When the artists are putting this together, is it okay if there's like clipping between those objects?
Absolutely. You do not need to make them like all intersect in one way. It's better if they don't all intersect in one way, because then you're limited by, oh, these ones need to be put together this way, and this one needs to be put together this way, which kind of defeats the whole purpose of kit bashing. We want them to be flexible and say, hey, okay, this crashes through, that's okay. Just be creative with them as much as possible. So yeah, pieces crashing through other pieces are totally fine. If I looked through that Skyward Sword scene more, I could have shown you dozens of instances of meshes crashing through other meshes. It's just kind of par for the course, honestly. You don't want to do it too much because it's wasted resources, but it happens a lot. The last bit is shared materials. Try and share the materials as much as you can between these things. You know, maybe your kit artist is giving material slots to these, but not necessarily final materials, right? Maybe leave that for the artist to decide. You can go, hey, this spot's going to be shiny, this spot's going to be not shiny, or hey, this piece is an emissive piece. And then let your artist go, okay, I'm going to do the color and the roughness for these particular pieces or whatever else, right? But you can also try and share the material so that when it goes in engine, instead of you dragging and dropping 30 different materials onto 30 different pieces of kit, you just go one material, bam, kit is textured, everything is good to go. The last piece of advice is to keep to one general theme. If you're going to have a kit for sci-fi, but you also need some non-sci-fi pieces, I don't know, maybe you're making spaceships in a game, but that game is also taking place on a farm. Don't mash all the metal pieces together with the pieces you're going to build the barns out of. It doesn't make any sense. Just have two materials and have two kits, right? They don't all need to be built together. You don't need one giant kit for your entire game. Just think about the parts that make sense together. All right, that is it for my yapping. At this point, we'll get started with the actual building a modular construction kit together. I'll go through it as slowly as I can, and hopefully everybody can stay caught up so that we can submit for the weekly activity. It is only been 50 minutes, so we should have plenty of time. Should honestly be able to get done by like 7:40, 8 o'clock, absolutely at the latest. Any questions about that modular stuff? Anybody still kind of wrapping their head around what modularity is, how to find it, that kind of thing? Or do you think we're all good?
Actually, I just have a question. I think you're going to probably cover it in the next class. Is when we're in, do you recommend using the kit version on just Blender, or do you think it's a good idea if it's something for lab design to bring into Unity, and how could we just in one file into Unity and have everything separate, or is there a different way? Is this probably something for our next class? If so, don't worry.
No, I just kind of mentioned that one earlier, and then I'll kind of go over it here too. But generally, once you get to a certain size, you can probably put it into Unity. So something with like the bridge, I wouldn't want to build, if I can find it,
Like you don't want to build.
I wouldn't want to build this bridge in Unity because then that is a ton of instances of these, and this bridge then goes from, let's say I have 300 of that bridge. If I instance 300 of that bridge, that's one render pass. If I have to render a pass for each one of these individual ones, that's 3. So it's actually worse than just having it as this one piece, right? So it is depending on how many pieces you have. If I had 300 pieces in one model, it would like destroy everything, right? Like it would take so long to render, it wouldn't be worth it, right? So generally speaking, we're gonna export most things. If it's so big that it's defining your level, right? If this wasn't a plank of wood, but it was, you know, an entire house, then yeah, you could build the entire house in Unity kind of thing afterwards, but your pieces would be broken up a little bit different. We will look at that a little bit next week. Next week is grid systems. So we're going to step away from, these are all loose leaf, quote unquote, systems where you can make these models and put them anywhere. Next week will be grid systems where we look at applying this modularity element to level building as a whole. Cool. All right, so if you don't have Unity and Blender and Substance Painter all opened, I'd recommend probably popping them open. I only recommend opening Unity now because it's probably going to take a hot minute to open as it does. So hopefully that will start opening in the background. Then we can hop into Blender and get started. And that is it's a terrible time for sunset. Right in my screen. Let's get started. I've got this example folder here just filled up with some of the things that we made. Right? So here are the bridges. We used instancing to actually create these bridges. So now if I want to make any changes to this piece of wood, it will affect all of my other pieces of wood. If I want to texture this piece of wood, all of my other pieces of wood will be textured, right? I've got a longer one that I can use for the sides and things like that. And then I've got a shorter one that I can use for the pillars, right? And it's all going to be instanced so that any change I make, I can just re-export these bridges later with those changes. For the instancing example, same thing, right? We can render so many of these because they are instanced, right? It makes it way more efficient on the computer to run like this, but it's the same thing. If I make any changes to this model, it will change all of those ones down there.
Wait, how's that work?
Well, this is just a particle emitter in Blender. I wouldn't use this in...
How is it that when you're moving that, because that block doesn't really look like a or are those just scaled down versions?
Yeah, so this is a particle system within Blender. You'd want to use particle systems in Unity, but this is just for example's sake. It's just a particle system that's placing a bunch of these meshes randomly on this plane.
Are you able to make a regular size version of an object, a bigger version of the object, but then when you scale the regular one, they both scale at the same rate? Is that one?
Sort of, kinda. So if I Alt-D this and make it big, and then I scale within here, it's still scaling, right? Because this is using the object scale, which is set to 2.3. And it's going to maintain that 2.3 size is bigger than this one no matter what. So it will always stay 2.3 sizes bigger. And if I edit the mesh and make it bigger, well, that will still get bigger too. And same with all of these, right? They're getting bigger as well. Okay. And the last example, the kit bashing, it's all a lot more of the same, right? If I start to move these around, you can see it's just being built up with these like 4 individual pieces, and that makes life super easy when we're trying to build up large scenes, right? It doesn't have to be this. I could take what I've got here and make like a helipad or anything else. Take anything that you can think of, and when I get to the point where I'm stuck, I can go to the kit guys and be like, hey, I need more pieces. You want to kind of do that at the beginning because it's hard to go back and add more pieces to your existing kits. You kind of want to have them ready to go from the start because once you start texturing them, then the UVs start to come into play. And once the UVs are all set, it's kind of hard to add more to it later. Anywho, let's get started. The very first thing I'm going to do is drop a human size reference into our scene. So if you don't already have one, I would recommend just grabbing one from online or anywhere else. I can also upload this guy directly to Canvas right now. It's just the UE4 default character, and I've got him standing at a height of 1.83 meters. So he's like average human size, maybe a little bit taller. When we're modeling, we don't want these pieces to be exactly one-to-one necessarily with real-world scale. We want them to look good beside our character and in the space. So I'm going to post that here. I am going to share the character. Yep. Yes, I will. We will pop in here. If you want to get it yourself, or if you want to get the UE5 character, you just go into UE5 with an example project and then just download the character as an FBX and go from there. Library. I would recommend also building a library of this kind of stuff up. You can see I've got a ton of resources for this. Human scale, and then we've got UE4 male. Add. And then the slides as well. Cool. Okay. I put it on Canvas under week 7. Okay, so is everybody set up with a mannequin and scene, ready to start modeling and everything like that? If you're not sure how to import, you just go to File, Import, Import FBX, and then you can drop it into your scene. Cool. All right, so make sure we get everything done on time. I'm going to go through it slowly, but I can't guarantee I'll stop for every single part, but the recording will be live afterwards, so you can kind of hop to it. So right now I want to just start by breaking down what we are going to need. So I'm just going to search up a traffic object kind of kit to think about the different parts we need. Because we're sticking to some kind of theme, I'm mostly looking for parts that are going to be the same here. If I look at a set like this, I'm not too worried about this concrete barricade or this giant plastic barricade. Right now I'm thinking about ones that mainly follow these two texture patterns. I'm thinking about ones with these white stripes, and I'm thinking about ones with this metal, right? Because we can use this metal on a variety of other things, all kinds of other things. We can make street poles with that metal. We can make traffic lights with that metal, right? And then we just have a few unique details in the lights or the signposts. So there are lots we can look at, not the AI ones because those are garbage.
Yep.
And we'll just keep kind of scrolling through, right? Something like this might be a good candidate as well. That might be a good target to have as a final kind of kit bash asset that we build using the assets we created for all these smaller pieces. So the easiest one to get started with here is probably going to be this traffic barricade, which is more or less just a few rectangles. So let's start by building it up. I'm going to add a new cube, and I want to just scale it down about to the size of a single barricade. I'm going to hit Tab in edit mode, and then we'll shrink it down. Okay. Shrinking it on all of the axes here, and then scaling it out till it's about the right size, right? I'm not making it any particular size. I'm just kind of comparing it to my human model here and saying, hey, this looks about appropriate in scale, right beside my human character. If you were doing a first-person game, you would have to approach this a little bit differently. You'd want to actually start putting these in engine right away to get an idea of how they feel within your FOV range and everything like that. But for our cases, we'll just pretend this is a third-person game, so we can kind of just look at our character here and say, hey, this looks good enough. So once we have one single bar here, I'm going to use Alt and D to duplicate it. And then just like when we duplicate, we can also lock in access for our movement. So I'm just going to hit Z and move it down. And then I'm going to hit Shift R to just do it again. And now I've got two evenly spaced instances, right? And because these are instances, they'll all move together.
How do you did the Shift R?
Shift R duplicates your last command. So if I Alt D, hit Z to move this down, click, and then hit Shift R, it will do the Alt D, Z, and move down just in one click. So now I've got 3. You don't need to, it's just for efficiency thing. You could also just Alt D again and move down. Okay. So now I've got 3 barricades, but more importantly, I have my first object of my kit, which is going to be this barricade plank. We are going to reuse this later for different props. So at this point, we know my size is about right. I can hide my mannequin with H, and we'll add our next object. I'm going to add a cube. And I want our cube to be grounded. I want this object to sit flush with the ground so it's easier to build our props. So I'm going to have to move the origin to the bottom of it and then move the object back to center. So I'm going to tab into edit mode. And with wireframe mode, just select the bottom. I'll use Shift S to move my 3D cursor to the bottom. And then tab back into object mode and use object set origin to move my object origin to 3D cursor. Then I can hit Shift C to move my 3D cursor back to center, and Shift S one more time, but this time go to selection to cursor to move that object to 0. The last bit there is Shift S and then selection to cursor, Shift S 8.
Like when moving the origin, I mean.
It's up here under object set origin, and it will move it to your 3D cursor. I've done that a few times throughout the semester. It's very useful. Basically every prop I make starts with that. I'd recommend getting pretty good at it because now, as you can see, my object is fully grounded. So any prop I want to make that's ground up, and if I export in this engine, it's just right there on the ground. Perfect. So back in edit mode, and the reason I'm doing my scaling in edit mode is because if I scale in object mode, there's a chance that I forget to apply my scale later. And if I forget to apply my scale later, we have to go through that whole process of relinking everything, right? Which just kind of wastes time. So if we make our scaling and changes in edit mode here, we don't really run that risk. So now we're going to build that bar in the back. And I'm just kind of shrinking this down roughly to size. Okay, I'll bring the bottom back down to the ground. And I'll bring the top a little bit higher than these pieces. What's great about this kit is at any point we can come back and say, hey, maybe this bar is better used for another object. We can size it up for that object and then have this piece shrunk down and it will still be just fine because we're using Alt-D. So let's move this into place for now. I want one kind of on this side. And then I'll use Alt-D again and X to slide this over. And now we've got one on the other side as well. So we've got the start of a barricade. I don't want these to just be totally square here because that's kind of boring. And I think we can get more use out of something that's more of a T shape, more of an iron bar looking shape, because we can reuse that in other places too. So I'm going to add 2 edge loops with Control R, going one direction, and 2 edge loops going the other direction. And then I'm going to delete everything on the outside top here, and we'll be left with a T shape for our iron bar. So we can fill these faces in using F. How what?
How come the T shape is more reusable?
Is more of a
More reusable.
more reusable? Because the T shape has both a flat side and a non-flat side. So I can take this and use it, let's say, in a larger object as a flat side. And then if I just rotate it the other way, I have the other side. So I can create variation with one object just by rotating it. If it was just a square and I just took it over here and I rotated it a different way, I'm not getting any variation. It's still just a square.
What would the other side be used for?
Just if I wanted to do some kind of material breakup. Maybe I'm duplicating these a bunch and I think it doesn't look that great when they're just all flat and plain. I could have one of them rotated to create some kind of variation. So it's just more useful. So that comes down to like having the different shapes and silhouettes. Like it just makes more pieces more useful. Okay, so we've got our 3 little barricades and a little T shape. Doesn't have to be a T shape, it could be whatever you want. If you want to just make it a straight iron bar, you can do that too, right? It's up to you. I'm just making a T shape for sake of something to look at, right? If you wanted it to be a cube, you don't have to follow this part. I'm just going to quickly demonstrate. But if you wanted this to be more of a traditional bar, you can do the same thing and just get rid of these parts. And now it's more like a traditional iron girder kind of bar. Sorry? Yeah. Yeah, it's up to you, really, right? The main thing is that we have another piece that we can reuse in our scene somewhere else. So if you have those two out of the way, we'll build up the legs for this piece. It's also just going to be a cube. So I'll add a new cube.
So Marcus, sorry for
Yep.
asking, but isn't it easier, like before you start out with the cube, you just like make a 1 meter cube and then you just bump it up, or you do a 2 meter cube and bump it up to 1 meter, so you have it at the base?
You could, but I hate working with this on because I always have vertex snapping on. So I have to disable this and switch to increment and then just move one part up and then move one part up.
Well, I'm not saying this, you're just like A, up, and then you just put on the Z wash.
Oh yeah, it's up to preference, honestly. If you get quick at it and you have it all hotkeeyed out, like you can just do it in like an instance. Mostly preference. Okay, so back to where we were. I'll make a cube and I'm just going to scale it down. Scale it down on Z to make it flatter. And then scale it up on Y to make it long. I don't want it to be the same length as these pieces because then it's less reusable. And I want something in between. So we'll make it a little bit shorter. All right, so now I've got this other rectangle. And we'll move this rectangle into place over here as our bottom. Alt D lets us bring it to the other side too. It looks a little bit funny and lopsided. Generally, these have these pieces going backwards, so we can just hit GY. And I'm just sliding these back just for proportions a little bit. This is basically more or less it, right? We've built a barricade. So I'm going to introduce a little bit of a new concept here. When we export this into our game engine, we want to make sure we export it here from the origin, right? But right now I don't want it at the origin because I want it out of the way so I can work on something else. I could put it in a folder and hide it, but with kit bashing, I don't really want to hide it because I want to be able to grab these pieces and duplicate them to reuse. So it's nice to have them all available. So in the middle here, I'm going to add what's called an empty. If I go down here in add, we'll find empty plane axis. And this is literally what it is. It's just a position. That's it. It has no mesh data, no nothing. It's just a position and a scale. But I can take everything that we made so far and parent it to this empty so that at any point I can just say, hey, put this whole thing back at World Center. So by selecting all of the other objects first and then selecting this empty, we're going to hit Control P, and then we're going to set parent to object. So now if I move this empty around, everything else is going to go with it. So I can move this wherever I want off to the side. And if I ever want to move this back to the middle, when I get around to exporting things, I can just get rid of the location and it'll go right back. As long as I don't move the individual pieces and I just move the empty, it's totally fine. So I'm just going to move the empty over here to the side while we work on something else. Same way you create everything else, you just hit Shift A and it's down here under empty. Plane axes. And then you parent with Control P. All right. Now that we have some pieces to get started with, we can actually start building up a variety of other things already. We don't have that much, but we can start to use what we have here. I'm going to grab 2 of these barricade boards, Alt D, and then use X to just move them over here. By default, the issue is they're now parented to this because I Alt D'd them. So I'm just going to select them and click Alt P to get rid of the parent. So if we click Alt P, you'll see clear parent and keep transformation. And now they are no longer tied to that empty. So parenting works the same way it does in Unity, same way it does in Game Engine, same way it does in everything. It's just the objects will move with the objects and then have their own independent movement relative to that parent. So I can take these 2, and I want to make sure they're here at the world center. So it's another reason to use that Shift S selection to cursor. We're going to move these, and now because the origin is in the middle of these, we know these are centered. So we can move them back up. For this one, I want to create a truss-like shape, and then we'll have our barricade pieces be attached to this truss-like shape. But again, they're still all Alt D, so if I make any changes to one, it will affect all the rest. So I'm going to grab these and move them out, GY. And then I want to rotate them on the x-axis, and I'm just going to rotate them back negative 45 degrees. Maybe a little bit less. That seems steep. Rotate them back at an angle that looks kind of nice. Let's go 26.25. Angle really doesn't matter. We're just kind of rotating them back because we're creating that truss. So I'll duplicate them. Still using Alt-D. GY. And then rotate them 180 degrees. All of these transformations have to happen in object mode because we're not actually changing the mesh, we're just changing where these objects are. So I'm going to go into the top view and just start to move these a little bit closer together. And then we can build up the actual kind of truss shape itself. So I'm going to steal this iron bar now and use Alt-D, Alt-P, and now I've got a clean iron bar I can use. And I'm going to rotate this just like we rotated these pieces. So it's 26.25 degrees. Again, the specifics are not super important. This just means I can now move this truss in, and it lines up nicely with my barricade. So we'll have one on one side, and I just want to scale it down on the z-axis to make it kind of shorter. Okay. Here, it doesn't matter that we have scale and everything like that because this is going to be our core object. This is our reference. This is what everything is referring to. And this has a maintained scale of 1, right? So this one, it doesn't matter as much. We could even kind of widen this out if we wanted to. And then I'm going to take that same piece, Alt-D, and X to just move it to the other side. So I haven't actually done any modeling since I made the truss piece here, but we have an entirely new thing. And now I'm going to do the exact same thing I did with these two pieces. I just want to Alt-D them again, rotate them 180 degrees to go the other way. And using G, Y, I can move them into place. Okay, I know we've got some simple barricades, but they're all using the same 3 props. So they can share a material, and they're going to be really effective to render. At this point, right, we're trying to make as few pieces as possible to get started, but at this point, we're kind of at a limit. I've got this point where these two connect, and right now it's really ugly. So I need something specifically for this that will remedy that. Or I can just grab this piece and put that up here to cover that and have these parts crash into it, right? That part's kind of up to you. I'm going to make a new piece because I think it'll just look better. So I'm going to hit Shift A and add a cylinder. I don't want all 32 sides, so I'm going to bump it down to something like probably 8. And I'm going to just shrink it down quite a bit and make sure to apply my scale because this is the first instance of this object. I don't want them all to be small. Same with the rotation. And then we can kind of move it up into position and scale it up to cover. If If I don't like how low these are, so I'm just going to move them up a little bit, but the angle is all the same, so it's not a big deal.
Do you worry about those gaps of it like not actually touching the frame?
Not really. You got to think about where the player is actually seeing these things from. If the player's camera is never going to be this close to these, they're never going to see it.
What if they are?
If they are, then you would probably worry about them. But in this example, if we're doing like a third-person game, I can imagine my camera would probably get somewhere like this at closest. I'm never going to see those gaps. And those little gaps are going to create some ambient occlusion, which is actually going to kind of emphasize the fact that they are different parts, which can be a good thing. So I don't worry too much about that. I don't worry too much about the fact it's crashing together here. If this was a hero prop, I would build it one-to-one like we have been and take my time on it.
And what we say hero prop?
If it has significance or importance, is going to be close to the camera, then that's the kind of props that you have to worry about creating that detail and being specific with your models. But if you imagine these, like, I'm just going to drop like 30 of these in my scene just randomly throughout. Right? This is a very junior artist job. This is not going to be front and foremost in my scene. This is a background prop. So I don't need to worry and have that same level of care because it's just not worth the time investment when we're actually trying to build so much stuff. Right? Because I could easily spend 3 hours making just this and really making it proper, or 3 hours making just this and really making it proper. But instead we've made both in like 20 minutes. And when we texture it, they'll all be textured at the same time. So it's just way faster in that regard, and it's not worth the extra hassle. You can make it close, but this is like fine enough for me. You can even crash into it. So the last thing I'm gonna do here for this rectangle is I just wanna oversize it a little bit because I think it'll look better. So in edit mode, we'll scale it up. And I wanna delete the top. So I'm gonna delete the top 3. Those top 2 faces. If that's selected, I can hit X, delete. And then I'll select our now isolated little dots and press F to build a new face. And then I'll select the end and make a new face, and the other end and make a new face.
Is that not an N-Gon?
It is an N-Gon, but we can fix that by just adding an extra loop and adding a cut. But honestly, in that situation, an N-Gon is fine anyway, because it's a flat surface. So I made it flat like this because A, I think it looks better, and B, it allows us to put some extra details up here, like little lights. We don't have any little lights yet. We'll determine later if it's something we want, but for now, we can call this a second kind of completed asset. So I want to do the same thing to this prop. I want to have that empty there so I can quickly move it around the scene and move it back when we need to. So I'll just hit Shift A and add another empty. Select everything else. Control P to parent.
That's what was another barricade?
Yeah, it's just a variation of this barricade. Right? We can make as many variations of this barricade as we want it to. We have all the parts we need to do it. So I can kind of slide this one over to the side too. And there we go. At this point, we're running out of things we could do with this barricade. We could theoretically make a few more, but let's say we're going to move on to a different part of our kit. So I'm going to make a pylon next. We'll bring our dude a little bit closer again, so I have something to compare the pylon to. And I'm going to add a new cylinder. Still going to have 8 sides, so we're good to go. We can start immediately going into edit mode to create the proper shape. Now you can just do this. It's not easy to understand just moving it to the ground like this. and then we'll think about what a pylon looks like. So I'm going to grab this top face, just shrink it down, and we'll have a nice cone-like shape. I think I want to raise it up a little bit as well. I'm going to add a second object now that's a cube, and this will be kind of like the base of our pylon. And I'll also just kind of scale and move this until it's in place. Okay. I'll make sure to shade smooth my pylon. So I'm going to right click, shade auto smooth, and then up the angle from 30 to 45. And we're basically good to go with the pylon. Because the pylon bottom here just has its origin on the center, I don't need to make an empty for this one. I can just parent the pylon to the base. And now this will all move together. I don't need that empty. I can move it off to the side.
So do you did the part being smooth on the sides?
Right click.
No, I mean this. Sorry, I just mean like this line just the shading looks funky.
Yeah, you can adjust this angle here, right? That's going to adjust how sharp the edge is before it shades it smooth. So by default it's 30, but if I bump it up to 45, it will round out angles less than 45. But these will still be sharp because that's an angle greater than 45. Yep, cool. No worries. So here we have a decent set of assets, but we are thinking still in our modular kit piece, we want small assets, large assets, medium assets. We built a few medium assets here. Let's think about small. So I mentioned having little lights on top of this thing. I'm gonna just quickly grab my empty here, and I can just hit 0 in the location. And we can go back to working on it as if it never moved. So I'm going to add another cylinder. In edit mode, we can just scale it down a bunch. I'll scale it on Z. And then I'll use I to inset a little bit, and E to extrude, and then S to scale once more. So now we have our light, quote unquote, and I'm just going to delete the bottom face because we don't really need it. Same thing for this one. I want it smooth, so I'm going to shade auto smooth, and then just set this from 30 to 45. And we see we still have a sharp angle, so I can pump it up to 50. So this light becomes another part of our kit that we can kind of put anywhere in our scene. So in this case, I'm going to kind of just put it on top of this little barricade. I'll shrink it down until it's an appropriate size. Kind of plop it here on top. Not being super specific or picky with where it goes. Alt-D, not Shift-D, and I'll pop it on the other side. Last thing I want to do here is just parent these to that empty just like everything else so it doesn't get lost in the mix. So now it's all combined. And now anytime we might need a small light or something, we have that there and we can paste that object. We can get even more granular and start making screws for these things, but this is fine, I think, for now. Yep.
So when you want a big version of an object and a small version of an object, when you go to texturing, which one do you texture with? Like when you texture, which one do you texture it with like the big one or the small one?
Typically later, we're going to grab a bunch of these individually and kind of duplicate. Okay. We're going to grab a bunch of these individually and create duplicates of them and texture whatever one has a scale of 1. If you have an object where you think you need a big one and a small one, texture the big one, because if you scale it down, the textile density will increase, which looks better than your texture stretching. It's still not
Like
the same, but
it would run into the issue of like having different detail in one object.
yeah, that's why you don't want to scale it too much, right? I can't take this barricade piece that's pretty medium and just go, okay, actually I have one that's this big too, right? That would never work. It would be I would need to make a separate one that's this big. That's why we want to have different size pieces in the kit as well, because then you can make up for those lost details in other ways. Right? So we widened these out a little bit, but nothing is beyond twice the scale here. I think 2 times, maybe 3 times is like the absolute limit before you really start noticing. Kind of 2 times is probably a good barrier. At that point, start making just a new one. So if I wanted a new light that was like a full-size light, I would come in here, make this rounder, keep it bigger, kind of thing. Like, yeah, I would have this as a separate one. So this one's not tied to this one now. I could subdivide it and call this my like large light for things. Ethan?
I was just wondering, I'm using excuse me, I'm using industry standard for the control scheme. Is control D the same thing as D?
Great question. I'm not entirely sure what it would be for that, but if you go here, you'll find it under duplicate linked. So if you go object, duplicate linked, for me it says Alt D, for you it'll say what it is. Cool. So we have 3 props out of the way. Let's make a kind of car barricade now. And I'm going to use as many of the same props as I possibly can. So let's grab these side pieces. And it's the same process. I'm going to Alt D, Alt P, and then Shift S to move it to the center. Okay, so now I have a new iron bar to work with. And this one, I just want to scale it down a little bit. From the front view, I can kind of move it over some amount. And I'll Alt D again and move this one over a similar amount. Then I can add a plane, and rotate it 90 degrees on X. And this will be our wavy kind of sheet metal that goes in front of these barricades. So in edit mode, we can just bring the bottom up. We can scale it until it kind of fits the size of our barricade. Okay. I'm going to move it out a little bit to the fronts of these T-bars. And using Shift R, I'm just going to give it 3 new sections. So click, right click to just drop them straight down the middle. Then we can move this middle section backwards. And move these other 2 sections out a bit to get our kind of wavy shape. I'll move these ones back until they kind of touch that bar so it's even. Okay, there we go. You can even add one more T-bar here in the middle just to balance it out a little bit better. And now we've got some kind of barricade. The last thing I want to do is give this a bit of thickness, because right now it won't be rendered from this side. So I'll just give it a solidify modifier. And we'll keep this pretty low. And then I'll just apply it right away. Control A. Okay, so that's another object that we have that's good to go. We have this pole here in the middle that's going to be at the very middle, so I don't need to add an empty. I can just use this pole, so I'll just parent everything to this pole. And now if I ever need to move this back, I can just get rid of my location. Smooth that over. So we have a pretty basic set of stuff here. Some barricades, a metal barricade, and some pylon. I'm going to move this stuff over quite a bit. And we'll see what else we can make.
Stop sign?
Yeah, we can make a stop sign, or there are a few different types of pylons as well. And then we'll start texturing. So I'm going to add a new cylinder again. 8 again. All the same steps again. We're just going to shrink it down till it's about the size of a pole that a stop sign might have on it. We can move the bottom down to the origin. And we'll move the top up somewhere really tall. I'm going to add another cylinder to use as the base for this. You just shrink it down. And this can kind of be the base. And I'll smooth shade both of these as well. Right? By default, nothing happens. They're still at 30. If I bump this up to 45 or 50, and the same thing for here, bump this up to 50. Now it's smooth. So I'm going to take this pole up a little bit higher till it's about the right size. And then I'll parent the pole part to the base part as well. Now I have a pole. I'm not going to add a stop sign to this pole necessarily just yet, because those stop signs and things, that's where we're going to get into those individual technical like materials, right? That stop sign deserves its own material, right? But this pole will be reused for every kind of traffic sign. We just need this one pole. So I'm going to take this pole and we'll add a new circle. And I'm going to keep this one at 16 vertices to act as a round sign. So now I'm just kind of making sure to move it into place. Or press F to give our circle some actual circleness. And then E to extrude it out a bit and give it some thickness. Same thing with the shading smooth. And then on our pole here, I'm going to just grab this top face and duplicate it with Shift D in edit mode. And then I can hit P and separate. And that'll make that face a separate object. But it's the same place and size as this pole. We can use that then. I'll scale this up and extrude it down. And this will act as our kind of like where the pole attaches to the signs, quote unquote. Okay, just want to make sure to apply the scale to everything here. And we have some sort of sign. In edit mode, you can select anything, duplicate it, and then hit P, and it will separate into its own object. So now I have a sign, and I could take this and I could put any texture on it, right? Any texture that's round. I could have this be a roundabout sign, I could have this be a turnaround sign, I could have this be any sign. And all I have to change is this one piece. I don't have to change anything else. This can all stay the same. So let's move this down, parent it. And that's another one for the books. So let's call this good. We're happy with where our kit is. We know we've got some great reuse out of a lot of these pieces. So we can actually start to go in here and kind of texture. So I'm going to grab, let's start with getting rid of our cumin here. I'll just hide him. And I want to start assigning materials to things. We know for a fact that we don't really want this to be part of our material. Or maybe we do, and we'll just create a duplicate face that has the actual stop sign or whatever on it. But for simplicity, we'll just say we don't want this to be part of it. But we do want this metal pole and this kind of metal girder here, this base and these steel bits, these ones as well. And we can even throw these barricades all in the same texture. So I'm going to add a new material, and we'll call this traffic kit. And I want to apply this to all the different things that are going to use this traffic kit material here, which is basically everything except for this. Everything else is going to get it. So I'm going to select everything, click the object that had that traffic kit, and we're going to use Control L again here to link materials between all of them. So if I Control L, we'll find link materials, and now all of these objects have that traffic kit material. Cool. This is where things might start to get a little bit weird. We want to take advantage of object and material tiling. So we can reuse the same kind of textures for different parts of this. We can use this metal for these things if we wanted to, or we could do it separately. I'm going to do it the way of keeping everything separate just for simplicity's sake. And to get started with that, we're going to have to move all of these into Substance Painter. So I'm going to unclick this one, This one's got traffic hit right now. That was by mistake. I want this one to have a different material, and we'll just call this sign. So we'll have two different texture sets, one for all of these and one for just the sign. What about the cone? That can be part of these ones too. Just because it's so small, it's not going to make a huge deal. So let's start UV unwrapping these. Might lose you a little bit here, but that's okay. You've got time to kind of go back and do it later. For the pylon, I want to delete the bottom because it's not going anywhere. And then I could probably unwrap this. Control E, mark seam. Control E, mark seam. And I'm going to pick one of these edges, Control E, mark seam, for my cube. Making sure that my scale is applied to all my objects at 1 as I kind of go through here. So we're going to do the same thing to the top. Every time we unwrap a cylinder, it's more or less going to be the same thing. We're going to mark seams around the top. The bottom doesn't have any. And then we need one edge down the side. So we'll mark our seam there. Now is where we make our money and where all this modularity comes into handy. You probably think it's going to take us forever to unwrap all of these, but it's not because we're already basically done. We've got like 3 more things to unwrap tops. I can unwrap this piece. I'll mark out the top. Right? I'm just going to treat this like a cylinder. It might as well be. It's just a large, long shape. We'll treat it like a cylinder. Mark the top. Mark the bottom. And then mark one of these sides here. And that UV will apply to all of these other ones. So I'm already done UVing this one, and done UVing this, and done UVing this, and this, and this, right? You only have to do the one, so it's super effective. So now I can unwrap one of these. And again, once I've unwrapped this one, I've also unwrapped this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, and this one. So let's unwrap the front. Mark seam. Unmark the back. Mark seam. And then I'm going to click one of these corners and mark seam. Or I guess I could do all of these corners. The UVs specifically don't really matter to you. It just makes sure they're good. Okay, and then same for these metal pieces down here at the bottom. They're not super reusable as they are right now, so I would maybe make changes, but we'll kind of just call them good and move on. Mark seam. Mark seam along the bottom. And then mark 2 of the corners just to clean it up a bit. If you can't visualize what's going on, that's fine. Just keep unwrapping while you're going through. I know what all these are going to unwrap like. That's why I'm kind of just bombing through it without worrying about anything. So here we go, unwrapping the cylinder, again, as a cylinder. This should all be pretty familiar to all of you by now. None of these are complex shapes. They're all just cylinders, basically. I think I've unwrapped literally everything so far as a cylinder. And we have one last piece here. Again, getting the cylinder treatment. And then one more piece, getting the cylinder treatment. End cap, mark, end cap, mark. Mark off the sides. Okay, last 2 cylinders. select the top and mark it, select the bottom and mark it, and then select some inconspicuous spot and mark it. Also a cylinder, bottom, top, one of the inconspicuous edges. Okay. Last one, same thing. Okay, and now everything is UV unwrapped and we're good to go.
Marcus,
Yep.
it's saying that I have like 27 islands and I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Sorry.
27 islands.
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, I've got some amount of islands as well. I don't want this one included.
So, just a quick question. Like, is it wrong if I just click everything in unwrap? Like without markings?
Everything like this?
Yeah.
Nope. As long as your seams are good,
I think they are.
then you're pretty much good to go, right? We can use this now. So I've got this unwrap. It looks like we have a little bit of errors maybe in some places, but we can just go through real quick and make sure our scale is applied. So we have a scale applied issue here. Make sure to apply that where we can. And it looks like everything else is okay. Great. So I'm going to take everything here and export it as an FBX. And we're going to take this with everything in it into Painter. So we can kind of work on it bit by bit all at once. Oh, including the sign. But the sign we're going to do separate. So the sign here, just another circle. And I want to leave the sign like this. It's going to take up an entire texture map at a much lower resolution, but we need it to be unique, so we're going to leave it separate. And let's export all this now. So I did kind of highlight using that hotkey for exporting just to speed things up. So if I Control Alt Shift F, I can export as FBX here.
Marcus, sorry for asking. I'm having some troubles with you. How about it's possible?
I don't want it to take too long here because we're probably going to go pretty close to time, but I'll help you after class. For now, if you're stuck, just kind of follow along. I should preface this also with this weekly activity, because it is definitely more involved. It's not due this Thursday, it's due next Monday. So you have the extra time in the weekend to kind of go back over that lecture recording and catch up and everything. So if you're stuck now on like doing the UVs, don't worry. You have extra time to kind of get through all that. So I'm going to take everything that we've made here and just export it as an FBX to my desktop, because why not? Make sure that we have selected on. I don't want the mannequin in there. Everything else I don't really care about. And we'll export this to my desktop. Okay, now that we're in Substance Painter, I can make a new file, and I'm going to import that file with all of my stuff. And for this one, your file size as far as image or your document resolution is going to be pretty important. We have a wide variety of objects here at a lot of different shapes and sizes, with some of them being as big as like 4 meters long. So this does dictate a little bit more of a larger texture. We could probably get away with something like a 2K on this and be okay with it. All right? I'm gonna leave it at 1024 though, and then I'll make our signs probably 256 because we don't need too much detail. So PBR metallic roughness alpha, same as we've been doing, and then when we export, we'll use the Unity presets. So for now, OpenGL because we're doing Unity. Okay. So we have everything in our scene all at once, which is fantastic. We can double check that all of our normals are facing the right direction. So far, so good. And the problem with texturing here, though, is we are now kind of calling our kit final, right? We can add more as long as we just use up the blank UV space, right? But we can't change our UVs at this point. So next time, if you want to add anything more to this kit, make sure that you're not packing the islands you've already made. Does that make sense? Because if I go back, let's say I wanted to add something to this kit, a new piece. I need to make sure that when I pack this, this finds some space that's not already being used, because if I move any of these existing ones, it's going to mess up my textures. One way to guarantee this happens is to take where I am at the kit right now and hit P. And P stands for pin. So imagine this is stitching. We're going to pin all of those points. And now if I unwrap, all of my pinned points, you'll notice, are not going anywhere. They're staying exactly where they belong. So this way I can't accidentally mess things up. My points are all where they should be. Yep.
So if you pin these things and then export it as an FBX and then re-import it back into Blender, would those pins still be there?
No.
Okay.
Pins are specific to Blender. So if you re-import, then you have to re-add those pins. But you should just have this file ready and good to go.
In just case you like send it to somebody or something like that.
Yeah, send them the
Yeah,
blend file then, and then
that
you're
makes
good.
more sense.
Okay, so now that we have these in here, we can start to texture them one by one. Because we imported it with two material sets, we have one for sign and one for traffic kit. So if I go into sign here right now, it's 1024 by 1024. That is too much. I'm going to drop this down to 256 by 256 because it's just the one sign, right? It's just this one little piece here. Now for the actual traffic kit. We're going to start building up our materials just like we kind of would anything else. So I believe Josiah showed you this during that last week lab. I want some mesh maps to get started. So I'm going to go into this baking tab here. We'll output at 1024 for the traffic kit and 256 for the sign. And then I'm just going to check this button, use low poly mesh as high poly mesh, and click bake. Next year we'll learn all about what baking is and how to use it to our advantage to create things like normal maps, but this year we're just learning kind of how to use them in Substance Painter. So now I've baked things down, and we're noticing some issues. When we have these overlapping UVs, what happens is it's going to bake the ambient occlusion, for example, from this object between these two. But then that means that when we reuse this object, we have that same ambient occlusion. So it's getting the ambient occlusion from here as well as from here, which is why we're just getting this black strip across that entire length. So the first thing I'm going to do is just get rid of the ambient occlusion. It's the only one that has problems when we do this kind of thing. There are easy ways around it as well, but we just don't need it straight up. So I'm going to remove it by going into texture set, finding ambient occlusion, and just removing it. Everything else will work just fine as intended because it's not basing it on other things, it's just basing it on itself. Ambient occlusion is the only one that interacts between meshes. So if we look at something like the curvature, everything is fine. So let's start building up our materials. I'm going to just kind of drag and drop some on for now. Nothing crazy. I'm not going to build anything up really from scratch. So I'll start with the steel since that's kind of easier. We'll find some kind of metal that we can use. as a base. Here we have steel. And I'll just drag that on. Yep.
Sorry, I think I figured most of the stuff, but how can I, in all of them, just apply the like rotation, location, and stuff, because that's making some objects really big and some really small.
Yeah, that's why you have to do it from the start, because otherwise you're going to run into issues like that, because anything that's duplicated will try to maintain. So you're going to have to just kind of tough it out. Once they make them really big and really small, relink them. So I'll do them. Find the original size one and apply the scale there. Click apply. And then relink all the other ones to that one with Control Alt.
Okay.
And then you should be able to just kind of go in and reset things. Okay, let's keep moving with this. We've got this basic steel on here. It doesn't look anything fantastic, but it's good enough. I'm going to add a black mask, just like we've been doing. And using the model selector, we can go in and pick the ones that are supposed to have this, right? You notice I only have to select one because they're all sharing UV space and everything. So I pick one barricade, it's got them all. I pick one ground piece here, it's got them all. Same for this, and same for this. So that's our steel. Okay. Then I want to grab some other material for these boards. I don't know what kind of material they would be. Let's just assume there's some kind of plastic. So I'll grab some kind of plastic. Here's a dusty one, and I'll apply that. Add a black mask, just like we've been doing. And then pick my barricades here. And you'll see it's already done it for all of them. Yep. Oh, just stretching? Gotcha. So for the steel here on the black mask, I just missed this piece, so I'm going to add that. And we're mostly getting there. Okay. I do want some rubber for this pylon. So let's just pop a rubber on there, add a black mask, and apply it to our rubber parts. So I haven't actually done anything but just drag and drop these, which is what I told you not to do. Remember, you are going to want to go in and make these your own. But for example purposes, it's good enough. We'll just make them our own when it comes to these patterns and things like that. So the rubber dry is black by default. We're going to quickly just pop in here. And change the base color to orange. And then for these barricades, we have the plastic where we need it, but we want to add that orange kind of stripiness to it. So I'm going to find the plastic material here and add a new layer inside that's only affecting color. And we'll make this orange as well.
How do you solve the problem like you're ending one and affecting all the others?
I can help you after the class with that stuff, but it'll be pretty involved because you're gonna have to go back over everything. It's important to get the scale right from the start, or it kind of makes it kind of difficult to go back afterwards. So I'm gonna add a fill to this new layer. So I've got my orange, and if I fill my mask with another fill, I believe there's probably some kind of existing noise that we can use that kind of replicates what we need. So we just need a bunch of straight lines, basically. Stripes. Perfecto. So now because we've masked this out with the stripes, we're getting orange in half of it and not orange in the other half of it. Okay? This is great. I think our steel is a little bit too shiny, so we can tweak it, but this is all kind of pedantics at this point. Adjust the base, and I'm going to adjust the roughness. And bring this up a bit. Then we can jump over to our sign, which is a separate material. And we can paint it however we feel like. We can add steel as a base and then add our kind of paint on top. In this case, I'll just kind of like plop it on. Why not? And this should be blue actually, I guess, because we'll do like a roundabout sign. I'll make my brush white and just use some random alpha here just for the sake of like showing you. So I'm changing my brush size with right click, and then with left click I can rotate it. Just kind of plop this on. Okay. So we've got a bunch of assets that are sharing UVs, they're sharing textures, and we could continue to build more and more stuff. The last thing is these lights, but again, I'll just hop back into our traffic kit and drop something on these for lights. We'll just make the bases of it steel. And then add a new material fill that's just emissive. Add a mask. And put it just on the part that we want to be glowy. Okay, so now we have a pretty good collection of stuff. We can continue to build up on this, but let's call this kind of finished. We'll save everything. And then we'll export our different materials. So I'm going to export textures right into our engine. Assets, textures. Okay. Making sure on output we're going to pick Unity URP because that's what we're using. So Unity Universal Render Pipeline Metallic. And then we'll export. And you'll see it'll export two different material sets, one for our sign and one for everything else. And they're also different sizes, right? These are 1024, this is 256. All right. Now we can start moving everything back to the center for exporting. I made the blunder of moving these within the parent. So let's fix that real quick. I'm just going to move them all back to the world center, roughly. It's not going to be perfect, but it's close enough. And same for this one, I'm just going to move it back on top of its parent, roughly. So let's start with this barricade. I'm just going to select just the barricade, and we don't really have to do any extra work. We can just start exporting stuff and putting it in Engine. So Control, Shift, Alt, F. Select your operator preset for your Unity project that you should all have by now. So in this case, static mesh, Unity static mesh, either any of these works. And then we will go find that project and put it there. So enter tick. Models. And here we have road barricade. We can hide that. We can move another one of our barricades in here and export this. So this is our, I don't know, foldable barricade. We have our pylon, small pylon. We could always add a larger pylon later. Pylon small. And then our, I don't know, standing barricade. Export that as well. And last but not least, our sign. So this sign, anytime we want a variation of it, we're going to have to export it with a different top piece here. Or we're just going to have to create a bunch of different textures that use the same UVs of this top face. That would also work. But we can export this all together. And this is our, in this case, left turn sign. Or we'll just call it sign. So when we open up Unity, everything is going to pop into scene. I'm going to hide this wireframe. We don't want to see that. Hide these as well. And we can click on each of our models and indicate that they should be using the traffic kit material that we haven't made yet. So we'll make that real quick. This should, again, all be pretty familiar to you by now. We'll call this one traffic kit. And we'll make another one and call that sign. And this one will be left turn sign. We'll find our textures folder here where we have a bunch of new textures. And then we'll let it know which textures are normal maps. So this one is a normal map. Okay. Apply. This one is a normal map. Okay. Apply. and we'll start to input our textures. So base map into base color, our emission into our emission spot, and our normal map into our normal map slot, and our metallic map into our metallic slot. Right, and we can move the smoothness up to 1 to make it match painter. For the left turn sign, it's the exact same thing, but it's the left turn sign. So metallic map, smoothness map. We don't have an emissive map, so we can just ignore this one. And then finally the normal map.
This might have already been covered before, but is there a way to get the smoothness map in Unity or here?
It is in here.
It's. Can you have that as a map, or is that with the metallic map?
It's in the metallic as the alpha channel. So it's packed into the alpha channel. This multiplier is just here as exactly that, a multiplier. So it's still using your values. If you set it to 1, it will just multiply all your values by 1. So it will look identical. If you set it to 0, then it multiplies all your values by 0. It's a weird system, honestly. I don't know why, because it should just be 1 for everything, because 1 is what you intended. But it gives you a little bit of flexibility.
Thank you.
No worries. So with that out of the way, we can go back to our models here. And under our demand remap, we want to tell it that, hey, anytime I put this in the game, it should use traffic kit. You see we have a bunch of variations of traffic kit. That's because it's just creating ones from here. Those will disappear as we do this. So this one now has traffic kit, traffic kit, traffic kit. And a lot of this is repetitive, it's boring work. But if you don't do this properly from the get-go, your life is going to suck. Traffic kit. And for the sign here, which actually the normals on the sign are inverted. So I will fix that real quick. There we go. For the sign here, instead of the traffic kit though, we're going to use sign. In this case, left turn sign, since that's what we have. So now we can start to build a scene in Engine using all of these different props as much as we would like. Okay, we have these modular assets to build as much as we want. We could build a road here in the middle by just kind of grabbing these. And in Unity, it's Control D to duplicate. And we can just Control duplicate a bunch of these down the road. I'll Control D again and move these over. And just make a second set. Okay. And this is where that level dressing job kind of comes in. We can place a car jack. We can use the sign that says turn around because there's obviously something going on here. Right? I could create another one of these and just put it further down. If this was a game, right, the player might have to navigate their way around these props. Okay, so with just a few assets that we made in just a couple hours, we can create a wide variety of different scenes and environments with these pieces, right? Conceptually, that's the idea behind modularity. We can make them as big or as small as we want as well. I hope everybody kind of grasped what we were kind of doing there, what the goals of this were. Even if you couldn't follow along one-to-one, if you have the understanding of what these modular pieces are meant to be, you'll be able to do the weekly assignment no problem. It might just take a little bit more time. So one last bit of note is we might see something like this where, okay, it's very obvious that this is the same piece, just 1, 2, 3 times, right? So we can create some variation. A big reason I haven't been kind of hiding a lot of the faces that go into the ground, right? Like, why wouldn't I hide the faces that aren't visible? Well, we're reusing these. So I could take this one and rotate it 180 degrees, or better yet, I could take these two and rotate them 180 degrees. And now when I put this here in Engine, right, I've got a little bit of variation. They're not all the exact same way. I could take this one and flip it, or scale it the other direction as well to sort of change where the breakup is and everything, right? So we've still got the dirt kind of here and here, but now it's not in the middle, so it's not as bad. With pieces like these, because they're not directional, right? These are directional. We need those stripes to be going the same direction. But pieces like these aren't directional, so I can scale them, invert them, rotate them, do literally anything we wanted to them to make some larger piece, right? And same goes for all of these other ones as well. I could make a secondary piece that's just the same one of this, but it curves around a corner. But it still mostly is built on this same model, and then you wouldn't have to re-UV it or do anything really. It's all kind of built on this stuff. So that's the idea, right? The last thing here would just be building something even bigger using these already existing pieces. Now that you have them all, it's very easy for you to quickly go back and make new stuff. So everything's kind of all over the place here, but hopefully you get the idea. If I wanted to make that billboard, I wouldn't have to model any new pieces. I would just make a use of all of the existing pieces I've got and then go from there. I'll do that quickly as a last example, right? We don't have to actually make any new pieces, so we don't have to worry about our UVs being messed up by adding new models, just about adding places where we need new textures. So let's duplicate something. I'll do this really quickly, and we can get out of here. Duplicate something, clear, move it to the center so we have a good starting point. And we're also going to need some of these T brackets, so I'll Alt-D, clear the parent, and move it to the center. And we have two pieces to start working with. I'm going to just scale this one up quite a bit to sort of demonstrate how much you can get away with before things start to get super noticeable. And I'll just multiply these by 2. That's probably about as big as we want to go. And I might decide that, hey, this isn't tall enough. Well, I can just Alt-D it again and put it on top of itself. And now it more or less is going to be tall enough. I'll notice a seam in between the two, but it's not the end of the world. I think this is kind of tall enough as it is though, so we'll just work from here. I'm going to move this over and Alt-D it. And then this giant plank we need up here. And we'll kind of rotate it in place as well. Rather than fighting with this to make one plank reach the entire length, that would just be too long. I'll shrink it down so we can have one here, Alt-D, one here. Alt-D again and move this down until it looks about right. Put one in the middle too. I'll Alt-D these again and reuse them up here, but this time scale them down on height a little bit. And this is kind of going to form the base of our billboard backing. And then we don't really have anything that works super well for these, but we can use our steel kind of beam, since they're similar in size, as kind of this front piece. And I'm not too worried about things crashing through each other that much here. We'll scale them up, move them down. Oops, not Shift-D, Alt-D, move it down, Alt-D, move it down. right? And I don't know a ton about what these look like exactly, but I'm pretty sure they usually have some kind of tops with lights on them to highlight the billboards. So I can even grab our little lights here, clear the parent, kind of put these underneath. Alt-D and move it over. And then I'll just kind of duplicate that a bunch. Okay, we can add a plane that's going to be our actual billboard bit. And this, of course, would need its own material, and you'd have to create your own textures for the billboard. But because this isn't a reusable piece, we also don't need to worry that much about it. It's just going to kind of sit here. Okay, it's just a plane, nothing crazy. And then maybe just for a bit more visual flair, because I don't like the way it's looking, I'm going to add one more down here and pull it out. And we'll call this good. Export it as billboard. And we've already done all the hard work of creating our materials and everything, so we can just hop in, tell it, hey, traffic kit is going to be traffic kit, and billboard is going to be, I don't know, bamboo bark, because it's something that's in the file that we have. Apply. We have a billboard to add to our scene. Apparently bamboo bark is an animated leaf texture, so I picked possibly the worst one. But I think you understand at this point what's going on here. That's better. All right, so now I've got a billboard by the side of the road in my little tiny road scene here that we've kind of put together. Okay. I hope everybody kind of understands that. That was my last little bit. We've got everything put together now. For the actual assignment, what I'm looking for is more or less some kind of building set like this. If you followed along, you've actually overshot the requirements, which is good. It's a good thing. Because requirements I'm looking for 3 kit bashed props. And I just want to see your breakdown of these kit bash props. Okay, so I want to see the individual kit pieces. So which pieces did you use to build all of these things? I want to see at least 3 things actually built using them. Building 3 things is really not that hard. I just built the billboard in like 2 minutes, so you could build 3 things incredibly quickly. And then screenshots of the kit and engine. So I want you to be able to put these things in engine. This is part of your job as well. And then the material breakdown. So I don't need like every individual map like I did for the last one. I just want to know like where are you using different materials? Like, hey, does this prop here have 2 materials? Is it 1 material? I just am looking for basically take a screenshot of this for your couple different props and then to slap that in there. So now that we've actually gone through and created these, I can update these visuals with something a little bit more representative. And that's basically it. Any questions? Probably many, because this was a big old thing, but like I said, you have a whole week to kind of complete it. Feel free to hit me up anytime, right now, later, next week during class at the end if you're still kind of struggling with it, because this submission won't be due till midnight next Monday. Okay? Cool. Thank you, everybody. I'll end that there.